Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Fundamentalists podcast. I hope you're doing well. My name is Elliott Morgan. I'm here with Peter Rollins, and we have a very special episode for you today. I know a lot of you guys come to us because you want advice on how to go through life. You want to know how to become your fullest self-actualized entity, and we, of course, are here to help you do that. And so today's episode is all on self-help. But before we get started, Pete, how are you?
I'm doing good, sir. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Have you ever heard of a book called Introduction to Christianity by Paul Hassert?
Oh, yes, I have. Yes. Hessert. He he wrote a really good book called Christ and the End of Meaning, which is very hard to get. It's absolutely brilliant. And so I think that's the only other book he ever wrote was the one you just mentioned. And I didn't think anything of it at all. But so yeah, so
Okay.
I don't even know if it was so different that I didn't even know if it was the same person who wrote it. But yeah, so I have heard of
Wow.
that book. Why is that one of the ones, sadly, that is no more? Because I don't
You
mind.
don't have it anymore. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
If
gone. And I liked the Introduction to Christianity back when it was called the Bible. Get it?
very good. Yep.
Be here,
You can't
be
take
here
a
all day.
fundamentalist out of a boy, eh?
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Yeah.
Um, what were you saying? You had something probably of substance to
Oh,
say?
I was just going to say, as long as it wasn't his other one, Christ and the End of Meaning, that was gone, then I'm okay.
Okay, I think we're okay right now. There's
Yeah.
some, yeah, hyper objects. Anyway, that's another one you lost. Hyper
Yeah,
objects.
that's okay.
Is that
That's fine.
okay?
That's
Great.
fine. That sounds like a object-oriented ontology or something. Yeah, fine. That's fine.
Perfect. You just made all those words up, and that's okay. So here is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go into some self-help tips that are very popular. I have asked a language learning model about just popular self-help tips, and I'm gonna go through them. And in case there's the kind of like running joke here is that Pete is not a fan of self-help. I would say I'm not, I'm putting words in your mouth, and then I would say I'm more
You
like, I
live
think
by
it's
it.
all lovely. Yeah, I think it's all great. And I live my life in a constant state of self-help. And so at some point, Pete's probably going to say, since we're doing the drinking game, folks, I'm going to bet that Pete says something about going from A to B. And every time he says that, I forget what the rest is. But I
Well,
know that
A
you're
is
going to say
not A.
something about A is not A, right, right. That's really fun. All right, so
You
are you ready?
understand that, you understand everything. Oh yeah, well, I want to hear
Per-
what ChatGPT said, but I also want to hear what you say. I want to hear the self-help that you live by that's worked for you so
Yep.
I can take that apart and mock you. So,
Yeah,
move between them if you want, but start with
I
chat
will.
if you need to.
I will start with chat because it's honestly there's. How about I'll do the one that's chat and the overlap between me and the chat GPT. So
Oh
this
yeah,
one
because I want to
is,
hear what you think. Yeah, what do you think of chat's advice? Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
yeah, this is the pinnacle right here. This is the one that I think people most go to. Practice mindfulness. Cultivate awareness of the present moment to reduce stress and improve mental well being. Isn't that a nice piece of advice, Pete? And who on earth would have a problem with it?
I mean, that is beautiful. That's a great piece of advice.
Thank you.
But I'm going to be, without being a broken record, here's what I think is that's a great piece of advice, right? That is easy to find. You don't need to buy a book on that. You don't need to go to university. The idea of cultivating gratitude or mindfulness or awareness, going out for a walk and appreciating being, all of that is it's easy to say. For me, always the issue is why can we not do it? That's the issue. The issue is like I'm about to run a retreat, and I used to years ago do a retreat where I help people who wanted to write a book, who wanted to start a podcast. I would give advice about how to be a public speaker, do all of that stuff. But as I went along in that journey, I came to appreciate that most of that stuff you can just look up and find out in 5 minutes how to start a podcast, how to be a better speaker. The issue is why do you, whoever the you is, why do you find it hard to cultivate mindfulness? Why do you find it hard to write when you want to write? Why do you find it hard to appreciate, your surroundings? That's my issue.
It reminds me of a talk I was listening to by my boy James Hillman, and he was talking about the going to therapy and you get stuck in traffic and you get all pissed off at the traffic. And then you go into therapy and you walk out with an idea about like your mother complex or the bad thing that your dad said to you when you were a kid, and you never address the actual issues, which is that you as a citizen are annoyed by the traffic because there is a problem there's the traffic jam is an actual political problem that needs addressing, and we end up just going and escaping into these theories, these psychological theories, rather than addressing the actual issue, and we interpret it until there's nothing left of it.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's interesting because here I had an example of this the other day because I've gone back and do psychoanalysis. I did psychoanalysis years ago for a couple of years, and I'm doing a little bit of analysis at the moment. And I forgot to talk to my analyst last week. I was having a bath. I was sitting there, and she called, and I was like, "Oh crap! I forgot." I signed in, and
Oh, this is classic.
classic. So the question is, to what extent was that just forgetfulness? To what extent was I just my mind on other things? To what extent was that a deliberate forgetfulness? And it's really hard to, it's not easy to answer that. So that person who's late, well, to what extent are they always late for things? If they're always on time for things, but they're on late for their therapy, does that mean that's different? Uh, it was the traffic particularly bad, or did they leave later than was wise? And is that a
Yeah.
common thing for them to
Yeah.
do? So for me, I generally don't forget meetings. Like I don't know if I can remember the last time I did something like that. So really annoyingly, although I wanted to say to my analyst, it was just purely forgetfulness. I have to then admit to myself, oh, it probably there's something to it. There was something to it. So with that, Hillman, it's very true. Is there's practical issues like if you cannot pay your rent, that's not because of some psychological issue necessarily. Um, there's practical political issues in the world, but also we are interwoven psychologically into those things, and they're very hard to pull apart. So, yeah, what do you think of that as a starting
That's
point?
nice. I just can't stop picturing you in a bath. I think it's a charming image, and I think that it's lovely that you genuinely enjoy baths so much. I think that's great, and I think that is the irony of that being kind of a mindfulness thing of being you're literally doing a self help thing as you're saying like it's not.
That is
That's
embarrassing,
great.
actually. I'm not embarrassed because, yeah, guys don't have baths. That's right. It's a
Well, I was
very
just imagining you like
unman thing.
splishing around and be like, ah, da, 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 da. You have a little ducky.
I'm just going to treat myself. I'm going to
You have a little,
have some
yeah,
bubble
rub.
bath.
You have a little Chardonnay.
I do
It's
not
beautiful.
often have baths. I do not. There's probably a psychoanalytic reason why I choose to have a bath rather than
Yeah.
talk to my psychoanalyst. You see, that's interesting.
Yeah, immersion, and you do. I like to think that you have an iPad and on the little tray, and you're watching Real Housewives of Salt Lake City or whatever. But yeah, great stuff. I
Well, here,
agree.
can
I
I
agree
give
with
an
everything you're
example of
saying.
this? Can I? Yeah,
Yes.
an example of this would be if you're on your own late at night and you hear something outside and you go, I think there's an intruder. That's right, kind of normal. If you find yourself always thinking there's an intruder late at night and interpreting the smallest creak as somebody being next door, there's a there's basically what's happened is something internal has hitched a ride on that noise and that creak. And the problem is so often it's somewhere in the middle. It's like it's very clear that if it happens once, you don't have to, that's not a symptom. But it's also very clear that if it happens every time you're alone, it is a symptom. Uh,
Yeah.
And then there's maybe a little fluffy bit in the middle, but that's why everything's open to interpretation, which doesn't mean that everything is a symptom, but it means that everything might reveal itself to be a symptom. So you have that's why the analyst will always ask, why were you late? Why you were in traffic, you got delayed? Tell me about that. Like, and they'll
Yeah.
analyze it, but it doesn't mean that there always is a psychological reason.
Yeah. Isn't that why people love the hermeneutics and the humanities? Because you just interpret everything. It's all interpretation constantly, even though it used to be just the scholar or just the scholastic, like, religious texts. Isn't that,
Oh,
am
tell me
I
more about
incorrect
that.
there? Like, hermeneutics technically is the interpretation of, like, sacred or religious texts, but in
Oh,
my
yes.
understanding is that they broaden it and basically go, anything is up for interpretation. Human behavior itself is up for interpretation.
Yes, so yeah, the hermeneutics, that's right, was a biblical discipline. Was it Deltoy or something? Was the original? That's a long time ago. But you're exactly right. And the biblical scholarship and the biblical hermeneutics became kind of universalized, and to the point with someone like Derrida that everything is a text that we
Yeah.
interpret. Yeah, yeah.
I've been enjoying. I think I told you a little bit about Dan McClelland and his Bible scholarliness, but he
Oh
kind of
yeah,
takes the fun out of a lot of the like interpretive stuff because it's so scholarly and it's so like,
yes,
no, actually, this is what it technically is, and it's like, oh, this is such an interesting and needed angle to come at it from. But I also like the other angles when Jung is like talking about Answer to Job and interpreting it through his lens. I think it's
yeah.
both are good and needed, but he's very good about being like, no, everything is an interpretation. We're all bringing a different interpretation to the Bible, negotiating with it. I think that's fun. Anyway,
The
uh,
one thing about him, the one thing about him, see what you think about this is, I always think he's bringing a machine gun to a knife fight. Like there's these YouTubers who are like scientists. There may be geographers or there may be physicists, and they create YouTube channels showing how flat earthers are wrong. And it's very entertaining to watch, but it feels like you're a physicist, kind of like proving that a flat earther is wrong. So with your man, is it McLennan?
yeah,
McLennan, yeah. I do
McClellan.
enjoy McLennan, yeah. Sometimes he is kind of like you have somebody who says like the Bible has a secret code that says Trump
Yeah,
will be president, and then he comes in and gives this 5 minute reason why that's not the case, and I'm like, well, I don't
like
need to
you
be a
needed
biblical
that.
scholar.
Yeah,
Although
thank you, Dan.
yeah, thanks. Although I guess in defense of him, he's doing it as a sly way to do biblical teaching. So he uses like
Yeah,
a popular way to say something, but it is funny when, oh, like the Antichrist is, Joe Biden, and it says that in Genesis by using
yeah,
this code. You go like, okay, you don't necessarily need to have a PhD in biblical scholarship to uh,
yep.
to think that that might be dodgy.
Yeah, it's that, and it's like there's a whole gaggle of people that are like, we discovered the Ark. This guy discovered the Ark, and they're constantly discovering the Ark. And every time, being like, dude, I don't think they got it. I don't think they have the Ark.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
it's part of that. There's a trend, obviously, that we all love is such and such destroys such and such on these YouTube channels. That's it's we like to see people crushed, and I wonder if it's because reality is so much more nuanced that it's lovely to see a position that's kind of silly be absolutely crushed. I, I don't think it's a good thing for us, but I do wonder why, because there seems to be a libidinal enjoyment we get out of a position a position that's often held by people who are struggling with psychosis. Some of these beliefs are like, if they're really far out, and
you're
then just kind of like crushing them. I don't know. I like it as much as the next person, but I also think there's something in it that we have to analyze. It's a way of getting rid of anxiety. It's a defense mechanism, I think. So I don't know. No.
I talk about that in my upcoming published peer-reviewed article, Pete, on the language in internet videos of destroy and own and trigger and all that, and I compare it to the Apollo myths of Apollo and how he had entered into a contest with Marseille and tricked Marseille, and basically they had to play their instruments, their respective instruments, and whoever did it before the muses better got the honor of punishing the opponent however they wanted. And so then they start playing it, and Marseille is like killing it, and then Apollo is all jealous, and he's like, "No, I'm Apollo. I'm a god. I'm the god of music. You can't do that." And then so he's like, "Why don't you flip your instrument upside down, and I'll flip mine upside down, and we'll see who can do it better this time." Only Marseille had a flute, and Apollo had a lyre, which you can flip upside down and still play, whereas a flute you can't, or something. And so basically, it ends up being that Marseille loses, and rather than like walk away from him, he fillets him alive and nails him to a tree.
Wow. Yes.
So, so I
And that
compare
is,
that to the triggering and the
yes.
owning, and the like, because it's not, you're not just winning a debate, you have to own them, you have to completely
Yeah.
destroy them. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
would you like to hear
And
another piece of advice? Oh
oh
no,
yes, well,
please.
say I'll jump in one last comment on that is that it's more interesting sometimes. I find that if you take a position that seems absurd on the surface and find something valuable in it. So, for example, let's say the moon landing, and that's not completely absurd. I think actually you can be a reasonable person and question that. So, I don't think it's completely outside the realms of rationality, and I think it's sensible enough to discuss, right? Um,
Okay.
but let's say someone comes along and says, "I don't believe that the Americans landed on the moon." Then there's also really interesting things about, well, do governments lie? Were there political reasons why they might want to cover that kind of stuff up? Is propaganda used by governments? Like, and you kind of go, you start going, well, actually, it's probably good to question in that way. And while you look at the evidence and I think come to the conclusion, I've looked at it, the evidence is there that we did it, or the Americans did it. That I
On a
also,
soundstage, yeah.
on a side,
Yeah.
I also find a way to um, uh, kind of find something valuable in what the other's saying, like genuinely valuable, something that actually is a challenge to me, who maybe has too much credulity to, say whatever NASA says. So that, and I think that can often actually also create more knowledge. It's not even just a nice thing. I think it is a nice thing to do. I think it's an ethical thing to do, but it's not about ethics for me. It's also about going, when you do that, you generally learn more, and so does the other person, and things move forward. So I think that's why, again, I love even the fact we're called the fundamentalists, but it's a playful kind of thing of going like, you can learn from flat earthers. There's something to learn there
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the last thought.
I was really taken aback on September 11th this year when I got on Twitter, or X as it now is called, and I found a large number of people who were really conspiracy. I mean, obviously, you're going to find a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists on the internet, period. But the amount of like, it seemed overwhelming of people who were talking about how 9/11 was an inside job, and all that stuff, and Building 7, and how, why did Building 7, and there's all these explanations that make total sense when you watch them, and you're like, okay, yeah, this, I don't believe this is a conspiracy theory. But the amount of people who are like, it's interesting because I'm old enough to remember 9/11, and I'm now, like, a lot of the people I think aren't old enough to remember 9/11, and these like are like younger people who are adopting a kind of conspiratorial view on it. And I think I was like, whoa, this is crazy, like this is happening in real time right now. Anyway,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
all right, you ready for another self-help now that we've covered nine
Yeah.
eleven and the moon landing?
Let's
All
see.
right, so get smart goals, Pete. Define specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound goals to give your life direction. Now, this is number one on the list of self help advice. I think it is an incredibly good piece of advice. I don't tend to follow it very well, but it is something I like to think about pretty often. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah. So give me it again. It's what, set, achievable, realistic, short-term goals. Sorry, was that, or say it again?
Close. So it's the acronym is SMART, and so it's
Oh.
specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals to give your life direction.
Hmm. Yes.
All right, you
Right.
okay with that one?
Okay. I'm okay with it, but I'll say probably what I said before, but in a different way, or I'll try to add to it. Right. So again, that's good advice. Uh, a question that I think we have to ask ourselves when we come to a piece of advice like that is, do I enjoy not being able to do that? Do I get a secret enjoyment out of not being able to set specific goals, to achieve them, to do that? So, because again, if I'm a healthy, just if everything's normal in my life, I can be smart, I can set those goals, I can do those things. If I'm having to read a book or talk to ChatGPT and have someone tell me that, uh, I would start to ask myself, is there something in me that doesn't want to do that? For example, am I protesting against my family, my parents? My parents always wanted me to achieve things. They always wanted me to have goals and do certain things. And unconsciously, I'm protesting against that. And until I realize that, and until I see it, and until I see that I'm enjoying sticking my finger up against my parents and protesting them, until I see that unconscious enjoyment, I won't be able to achieve that goal. So again, it's not that the advice is bad, it's that if you can't do it, I'm like, is there a secret enjoyment you're getting from your self-sabotage?
Do you think there's also a sense of enjoyment just from reading self-help stuff? I know back in the day I would get like the satisfaction of reading a self-help book is half the battle of doing it. And it's like, oh, I read it. I know what to do, and then I don't have to do it.
Yeah, and here I'll say something interesting about this is about moving from A to B, right? So
Awesome.
self-help. Maybe one of the enjoyments about self-help is you're looking at yourself, but you've got your eye on future self, right? You've got your current self that you're dissatisfied
Oh,
in, that
hate.
yeah, you
Oh,
feel
awful.
yeah, you feel kind
Terrible.
of an imposter, you feel yeah, not good. And so you're reading self-help to become something better, to become someone better. And there's some enjoyment in that and in maybe fantasizing that future self and keeping your eye on that. What happens in therapy, as you know, is instead of focusing on this future idealized self, this better self, and sometimes it's the author of the book, they're your ideal image. There's this person, they're successful in music or in business or whatever. I want to be like them. So you've got an idealized image of yourself. Instead of that, the challenge is to actually confront your own dislike of yourself and your own dissatisfaction uh, and rather than get the enjoyment out of kind of looking at your future self, is you have to do the hard work of doing nothing, just having grace for yourself and go, I'm going to look at myself and see all of my disappointments and all of my aggressions and all of my fixations, and I'm just going to try and see if they tell me something. I mean, that's key for me is, what is your symptom say to you? Lacan used the old French term symptôme to describe symptom. It's a special type of symptom called a symptôme. And symptôme in French sounds exactly like holy man, symptôme, holy man. And so, in a way, you can think of your symptom as a prophet that's telling you a truth. And if you ignore the prophet, right, disaster will befall you. But if you listen to the symptôme, if you listen to your symptom, it'll speak a truth about your enjoyment and your life, and that truth can set you free. So yeah.
Wow, that's really nice, Pete. That's really good. You should write a self-help book. It's really nice.
Oh, here's the other
I
thing
enjoyed.
about this. Oh, yeah. There's actually a
No, you.
self-help book that I quite liked. It's there's a book. It was a guy called Joseph Burgo, I think, called "Why Do I Do That?" And it's a book that just defines various defense mechanisms that people use. They might use displacement, putting anger from the past onto somebody else, or they might use denial or reaction formation, where you kind of do if you're very unsure of yourself, you project confidence. You hate yourself, you project love. Reaction formation is actually the true emotion is hidden behind the opposite. So it kind of goes through all of these defenses, and all it does is it asks you to consider what your defense mechanisms are and what they might be hiding. And so I suppose that's a kind of self-help book I like. But again, it's not about getting you from A to B. It's about helping you to look at the defenses you have and try to look at what lies behind them, and that can be a kind of productive
It's
transformational
like
thing.
a it's like a deepening into. You just go a little further into that sad dissatisfaction that you have, and just wallow and just treat it like a little bath and get in there. It doesn't matter what appointments you have that day. It doesn't matter if you're gonna completely space. Just get in with your rubber ducky and deepen into the symptoms that you have. You don't need anybody else. You don't need the therapist. Is that what you're saying, Pete?
Well, the last bit, no, definitely not. The rubber
Okay.
ducky, yes. The bath, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, the trick for me, and the reason why you need a therapist or somebody, you need somebody who is that, I would argue, and the psychoanalysis argues this, that in order to see yourself, you need to be reflected off somebody else. So,
Yeah.
for example, slips of the tongue, you don't notice your own slips. There's a whenever you're speaking, there's a certain dimension of yourself that you do not see. But if someone is trained to keep an eye on those things, uh, then uh, you can see something. So, for example, actually, something that happened in my analysis last week is I had a dream, and after the dream, I was asked to free associate on the dream, and I couldn't free associate. I'm very bad at free association, right? My mind was blank, and I was like, I'm really bad at free association. And the analyst was like, that's an interesting association because that was a free association. Like I had the dream, and then I said I'm bad at free association, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying that I'm bad at free association is a free association because it's basically what's the first thing that comes to mind, and the first thing that came to my mind after the dream was I'm bad at free association,
I suck
and
at
then
this.
I suck at this, and then that kind of opened up something that I wouldn't have seen because if I'd said that in a regular conversation, oh, had this dream, I'm really bad at free association, so whatever, that would go past. But the analyst just made one comment. That's an interesting free association. And it opened up. So you having another person who is able to reflect back to you a type of speech that you're saying, but that you don't realize you're saying is very productive.
Very nice.
Mm.
Now this one, Pete, I think you're gonna love. This is my absolute favorite one, and then we're gonna get into actually the ones that I do like, which is all based on Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Fifth Agreement. And that'll be a fun. We're gonna blow through the agreements in just a moment, but before
Okay.
that, develop positive affirmations. Now this is tied to what you're just
Mm.
talking about, Pete, with the idea that you maybe are not so good at free association. So why don't you start looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, I am good at free associations.
Mhm.
See what happens.
Yes, I am lovable.
Do you?
I am good. Yes.
Well, let's not get
Yeah,
carried away, but yeah.
yeah, yes. Yeah, I've often found this one interesting because very few, there's some types of counseling, of course, that do this, but in terms of proper psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, you have to go, why do they not do this? If it's effective, why do they not say, look in the mirror, say positive affirmations, et cetera, et cetera? Um, but the reason is because it's almost this is precisely what repression is. Repression is a mechanism for neurotics that when you're young, something unpleasant you want to ignore, so you get rid of it, you push it down. And for Freud, his initial reflection on repression is the affect, the kind of emotion, and the thought get disconnected. You push it down, the thought can go away, but the affect remains. So the affect connects to something else. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
uh, your mother is very domineering and whatever, and you're really angry at her. You push that thought down, the anger remains, and now it sticks to something else. It sticks to your partner. So you're angry
Yeah.
at them, even when they don't do anything wrong, because the affect still exists, but the thought's been repressed. The other side can happen as well, where you have then the thought of something where you can talk about some abuse that happened to you when you were young and have no emotion about it at all. But then you watch an advert about some little puppy and you burst into tears, right? So
Hmm.
again, the affect and the thought have been disconnected. So in one sense, this positive affirmation thing is a replaying of our most basic defense mechanism, which is push
Just don't think about it.
away the bad thoughts. And if that worked, it would be great. But the way, as I say, Freud, I think, really was discovered and showed that what happens is, yes, you'll get rid of the negative thoughts. So you'll literally be walking around. And I know people like this, they walk around and they say, I don't like being around toxic people and I have positive thoughts and they fill themselves with positive affirmations. But you can see the affect it's coming out somewhere with an extreme explosion of anger at somebody or extreme emotional sadness at something seemingly insignificant because they've successfully pushed the thoughts out of their mind, but the affects now free float and attach themselves like parasites onto other things. That's one
Yeah.
reason. There's lots of reasons too, but that would be my first thought is you yes, you'll succeed in pushing the negative thoughts down, but you won't succeed in getting rid of the affect.
Yeah. It's a very it's
Yeah.
flipping off the check engine light rather than seeing what's going on
Yes,
in the
that's a
engine.
brilliant yeah, that's a brilliant analogy. And because then and then the alternative is you work through it. You work through the night thought. So you go, actually, I'm really angry at my mother or my father or my siblings. I that and you work through it with your analyst. And part of that might be realizing that the anger was misplaced. And but you can only get there once you kind of go through it and once you fight it through and replay it with the analyst who becomes a stand-in for your father or your sister or your brother or your mother. Um, but it's almost like a play that you have
Yeah.
to recreate. You have to recreate the scene and work through it and almost reconnect the affect to the thought, work through the thought, and hopefully find freedom that way.
And you become a little more of a human. It seems nice, because
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times this stuff just makes you kind of a shell of a person, or it makes you can a little bit make you more of a boring
Mhm.
person. Because like when people are just like, I'm just gonna say positive things, and I'm only gonna, it's like they come off to me very rigid. Like they're still, and it goes to show. I mean that makes sense given that it's literally like just performing the act of repression when you're doing that constantly, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Um,
And what you might find, like I found this anecdotally, but it makes sense from the Freudian perspective, is that if you do that, I say the affect doesn't go away. So what you'll end up doing is just having more emotional responses and not know why. The person will
yeah,
have, so they'll feel good. They'll even go, I feel like my thoughts are good and I feel good and I feel this, but then they will have emotional affects and literally just go, I don't know why I'm feeling like that. I don't know why I'm responding to that because they've been so successful in repression, so successful in detaching the thought from the affect. And so that can even be distressing.
I because I've my this year has been marked by some health issues in my household with my wife. I have
Mhm.
found an increase in my I guess a decrease in how long my fuse is in traffic, and I've noticed that I will become like really angry out of nowhere and have that kind of, and I was thinking about it last time it was happening, and I was like, why am I so pissed off about this, and why is it happening more frequently right now? And I was like, oh, it's because there's a stress happening at home that I keep everything cool and like calm for, and then out on the road when there's like some perceived sense of injustice, it all goes out the window and I become like, even if I don't act on it, it's like this feeling of just like a ball of anger, and I'm like, oh, this is because this is all, it's all fine, it is what it is. So
Yeah. And
and
that's,
then
and
I
yes, and
rear end
that's,
up.
yeah. Yeah, and that's displacement. Yeah, exactly. That you're taking an anger and an affect from one place and you're putting it somewhere else. And the thing about
Yeah.
every defense, which is important, I think, to say, because it can sound like they're negative, in the analytic thing, they're not. positive or negative in themselves. So, for example, if you're a new mother and your child is crying and waking you up all the time, you cannot be angry at the child. Like, you can't take your anger out on the child, right? They're very helpless. So you might shout at your partner, and that's a displacement. But it's also an acceptable displacement. Your partner will go, I know that you're just, tired and frustrated, exhausted. And so in a way you go like, I'll hold that displacement. And then of course the person, if you're able to contain that and take it on, the other person will, within an hour or two go, hey, by the way, I'm really sorry. I'm just exhausted and I took it out on you. So, what happened to you in the traffic is like, that's kind of like that's a healthy form of defense where you can actually show your anger in the safety of your car, be pissed off at a driver, and as long as it doesn't become road rage, which is where it becomes mentally ill. But then it's almost like you have to be able to express that emotion, but you might not be able to express that emotion kind of in the context in which it arises, you know.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about because the Jungian frame, it's complexes, and they say the same thing, that the complexes are like neither good nor bad, but they're usually just trying to protect you. Like there's some sort of wound, some scar that's attempting to protect your fragile, hurt ego from being hurt again. And it's the same thing where like you're not gonna cure it, like you don't get rid of it. You're not gonna like get rid of any complex that you have because they're so ingrained in you. Um, but you can learn to live with them, I guess, is
Yeah.
the general like idea.
Yeah, and on that,
Now,
oh, can I jump in on that one? Because I think that's really
please.
insightful what you said. And it's that this is the idea that, if someone's, say, an alcoholic or something like that, instead of trying to fix the alcoholism, the first step is often to admit, you're an alcoholic, and then to ask yourself, what is this the solution to? Not the alcoholism is the problem. The alcoholism is the solution to a problem. And what is that problem that this is a solution to? And maybe it's in terms of a real dissatisfaction with one's life, one's job, one's relationship, some issue from the past, from parental upbringing. And once you begin to ask that question, so again, in self-help, not all self-help, but in some self-help, you see a problem, right? And you go like, I just can't I don't have any motivation. I don't have any motivation. I feel emotionally dead. And you read some self-help to get you to be, to achieve more. But sometimes that deadness that you feel is the solution to a problem. It's maybe there's some deep emotion and deep pain, and that defense of numbness is kind of defending. And what
Hmm.
you actually have to ask yourself, exactly what you're saying with the complexes, is what is this a solution to? And and in analysis, the idea is that when you begin to unravel that question, change becomes possible. But only when you realize that often your suffering is, as you said, the solution to a problem. Almost as something worse. Like whenever you think that there's someone in the cupboard at night or there's somebody under your bed, that terror of this presence um, is often covering over the terror of some over proximity of someone from your past, right? That's even worse. So it's easy to say there's a
Yeah.
stranger in the cupboard than, than whatever it is that's covering over.
Very nice. I was thinking about the very popular idea nowadays that Freud was dealing with hysterics, Jung was dealing with schizophrenics, and now what we're dealing with is numbness. There's a sort of pathological numbness that everybody has. It's very prevalent, and what is it defending as a defense mechanism? What's it trying to do?
Yeah,
It's all
yeah,
fun stuff to think about. Now,
yeah.
speaking of other fun things to think about, have you ever heard of Don Miguel Ruiz, Pete?
Don Miguel, who?
Excuse me, Don Jose Ruiz. Yeah, Don Miguel Ruiz
No.
is his.
Oh yeah, nope, nope. Tell me about him.
This is classic. This is one of the better selling self-help books. There's the Four Agreements, and then he did a sequel called The Fifth Agreement, which is the one I have read. I'm curious how many of these I will agree with still, because when I first read it, I thought this is absolutely genius, and I still believe it's one of the better self-help things. However, it does do the thing where it's like, if you follow these things, you're going to be happy and peaceful for the rest of your life, and there's nothing anybody can do except what the agreements are. It is relatively, I believe, difficult to maintain. So here's the agreements: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, always do your best. That one's a cute one. And be skeptical, but learn to listen. So, here's my thoughts on that, Pete. One, Freudian slip shows you can't really be impeccable with your word in general, right? I mean, it's impossible for
Yeah.
anybody to be impeccable with their word, even if they're trying to. But I get the idea, be honest. If you be honest, you always have a leg to stand on. That's really beautiful, and that's good advice. Don't take anything personally. Well, I would love to do that. I would love to do that, Pete. I would love to get cut off in traffic and not take it personally. But that's not the case, because I'm pretty sure it is personal, and I'm going to let the person know about it if I see them, if I can, when I zoom up past them. Always do your best. No, thank you. Don't make assumptions. That's a good one. Don't make assumptions. Obviously, you can't help yourself from doing that. And then be skeptical, but learn to listen. Be skeptical, but learn to listen. I think you're really good at, Pete. I think you're very good at that when it comes to things like your flat Earth buddies and your moon landing denialists.
Yeah. Well, okay, these are great. Let's dive into them.
Hmm.
Okay, so okay, so we'll start with the first one then, which was always be impeccable with your words. All right.
Impeccable with your word.
Yeah. Which means, in a sense, is he talking about honesty, clarity, uh,
Mm-hmm.
being honorable, keeping your promises? Is that
Yes. And
be
yeah, and
honesty?
these are, my understanding is these are in order, so that you, as long as you're being very honest, you can then move on to not taking things personally. But you just, it doesn't mean you're saying nice things. It doesn't mean that you're saying positive affirmations. It means that you are, as to the best of your ability, being honest and soberly assessing and everything, and not lying,
Mhm.
I guess.
Yes. I mean, like, I don't want to nitpick. There's a couple I think as we go on that I'll have more to say about. I do think you said something very interesting there, which is like, is there a sense in which dishonesty or miscommunication is an inherent part of language, right? And I do think that that the difference between language and communication is that communication can be clear, concise, uh, and communicates what it wants to communicate. So computer code is communication, animals communicate. But when you get to language, language is slippery. It's always open to both making understanding and misunderstanding. It's not all misunderstanding, but it's not all understanding. There's a certain sense in which we can never say everything we want to say. We can never say what we want to say absolutely. And anybody knows this who's a speaker, who's a writer. You write an article and you go, I didn't quite say it. You do a talk, you go, oh, I could have said it better. And the sense in which language is always got some sort of misunderstanding and dishonesty within it is actually what keeps it going. So, you know, I worry that when people give themselves over to these pieces of advice, then they might it's impossible. It's an impossible piece of advice.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
That's the biggest thing, I think, is it's totally impossible.
Mm.
Don't take anything personally. What do you think about that one, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I quite like this idea in that, but for me, well, here's what I would say. I would say whenever you take something personally, ask yourself why, right? So that's the first thing, because I think like we all take there's certain things that push our buttons, right? We all have certain things that push our buttons. And for me, the big thing to do is to take cognizance of that whenever something somebody says really pisses you off, and especially if it doesn't piss other people off, right? It pisses you off, but other people are fine about it. Then you ask yourself, is that me? Is that something I do? Am I pissed off with them because actually they're reflecting a part of me that I don't like? Because sometimes we take the bits of ourselves we don't like, we put them onto somebody else, and then we judge them for it. Now, I think if you do that, you will take less things personally. And I think it's good to take some things, but if someone kills my dog, I'm going to take it personally. So, and
John
that's
Wickham.
okay. But I know, yeah, but I know he doesn't mean that, so I'm not taking the piss there. But I'm more saying that I think in order to maybe do what he's talking about, and he might agree with this, in order to not take things personally, the first step is simply to be gracious with yourself. So don't tell yourself not to take things personally. Be gracious with yourself and say, I'm going to take things personally. That's okay. But what I need
Yeah,
to do is I need to ask why.
I say 100% take it personally. Take
Mm.
everything so personally until you get exhausted and it doesn't like sting anymore.
Oh, yeah, that's a desensitization.
Complete decent. Yeah, yeah. What's the term? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how anybody can not take anything personally, but I also know I've seen people who will say they don't take things personally, but boy do they. And then there's other people who really like nothing gets to them, and you gotta wonder what's going on.
Yeah. I
Would
have a
you say you
friend.
take most?
Yeah.
Yeah, where are
Oh,
you at on this spectrum?
well, I was going to say, I've got a friend, James. There's a group of us always play poker, and that guy is unflappable because around the poker table, usually after a few drinks, people often say terrible things to each other sometimes. And James just uses it as an opportunity to find something humorous. But no matter how much he's attacked and ridiculed and mocked, and we do mock him and we do ridicule him, he is
We are cruel.
invincible. We are cruel. And I think of myself as not taking much personally, but then out of the blue, somebody will say something and it will hit me.
Yeah.
And so I think we all think that. We all think, okay, I don't take things personally, but then there's something hits you. And yeah, and I think the best thing is just if you're able to take a beat and go, whoa, why did I respond to that? Why did I and the sad thing is going, is there some weird truth? Not necessarily in exactly what they say, but there's something in
Mm-hmm.
that I reacted against. Yeah.
Yeah, something fits. It reminds me of that time you got mad at me because I complimented you, and I was like a puppy going, what do you remember that? We were at
I
Brickyard.
do vaguely. What happened? Do
I
you
said
vaguely
you were
remember
deserving of love or something. I was like, we're gonna get you in love, Pete. You deserve love, and you were like not having. I was like, whoa! I hit some kind of like that dude is not read Don Miguel Ruiz.
that? That's right. That's my one trigger point. If someone's nice to me, I
It's
do not
like,
like
whoa, yeah.
that.
This guy needs to go sit in a bath. Don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions. I think it's kind of the same thing as being impeccable with your word, right? Like you can't really do it. It's impossible.
Yeah, and yeah, because I did once go to a, it was like a drug retreat. A friend of mine was having, and I was there, listening to this shaman give a talk before the medicine, what they call it, there, um, and uh, they were saying how she was saying how you take this enough and you will make less assumptions about the world and make less judgments about the world and have a wider appreciation of things and be able to do more things. And it was interesting, but I was thinking about how there's a reason why there's we assumptions have certain social utility that allow us to function. Like we make certain assumptions, like silly things, like if I lock the door, it's locked and will remain locked until I come back, or if I
Yeah.
park the car around that. So we make a million assumptions every day that allow us actually to function socially. When we get too tied up in assumptions and we get too neurotic about them, that's really difficult. But if you're going through some sort of psychosis where you don't feel the assumptions, where you don't have any sense of social constraint, that also can cause problems. So I mean, I don't want, I feel like I'm totally feel like I'm nitpicking. Like, what you tell me, what does he mean by
Yeah.
that? That's a better thing. I'm assuming that I know what he means by it, and I shouldn't assume that. So tell me
Yeah.
what does he mean by
Ha.
don't make assumptions?
He wins again.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
he got it. I mean, I think it's like don't. I think it's you write. I believe the image he uses is the movie theater. You're in a a you need to step back, remember that you're writing a script in your head, and don't write scripts in your head about people's ulterior motives. People sort of you fantasy about people all the time, and I think that's what we start. Just don't make assumptions
Yeah.
about what
Yeah.
other people's motivations are, because it's a waste of your time. This one I actually think is pretty good, because I don't think anybody can do it, but I do think you can get pretty good at it, and life becomes a lot easier when you stop trying to, like, when you just take people at face value and you're like, all right, that's what
Yeah.
okay, great, and you just go from there, because most people I don't think are conniving and lying constantly, so it makes
Okay,
it for a
well,
more peaceful life.
yeah. Well, what do you think of this then? If because I rewrote the other one. What was the other one? I said, beware of your, what was it?
It
Uh,
was
I've already forgotten.
don't take anything personally, but if you do, ask
Oh
why, or
yes, oh
something like
yes.
that.
Whereas I was saying, you beware whenever you take something personally, think it through, reflect on it, ask a friend, why do you think I take this personally, and work through it. Don't repress it. In the same way, I go, I'd maybe say not don't make assumptions, but rather be aware of your assumptions. Like be,
Yeah, pay
because
attention.
yeah, pay attention to your assumptions, because I think science progresses precisely because an individual questions an assumption. Things fall to the ground and Newton goes, why? That's just, we all assume it, we all just take that for granted, but then someone doesn't and they ask themselves why. So again, because I don't like don'ts very much. I don't think don'ts work. And in fact, if they did work, I would be all for them. But I think the more you say don't do something, the more unconsciously the person wants to do it. I mean, we see this with kids. Don't open that box when I leave the room. I mean, any parent can do that experiment and see what happens. You know, like the kid
Yeah.
hasn't even noticed the box. And as soon as you say, now, whatever you do, I'm going to leave the room for 5 minutes and don't look in that box. Don't go near it, right? It's like even if they don't, they suddenly are libidinally invested in the box. So I think, and this is a very biblical notion, the more you try not to do something, the more you want to do it. This Pauline idea. So grace is always the thing of taking away the prohibition, but helping you see yourself. So instead of saying don't assume, maybe it's going beware of your assumptions and then ask yourself, are those assumptions right? Can you question them? And you don't do it with every assumption, but I think again it's just being more aware of how you navigate the world. So that's maybe how I would rewrite that one.
Nice. Yeah, it's like being really more engaged constantly, paying attention to what's going on, diving, almost
Yeah.
deepening into it, like into a nice warm bath.
Yes. I give you an example? Actually, a friend of mine recently, she was terrified of spiders. Absolutely terrified. She's been terrified of spiders all her life. And she's in her 30s now, and all her adult life been terrified of spiders. And she could do things like desensitization, all of that. But anyway, one day she had a dream, and she told me about this dream. She said, I had a dream about spiders. And between the two of us, we sat down and we talked the dream through, free associated with it, looked at all of the symbols, and we talked about it, and we connected it with her father, and all of this stuff
Mm-hmm.
happened. So that's all that happened. We did this interesting discussion about the dream. Anyway, 6 months later, just very recently, she texts me and she says, Pete, I woke up and there was a spider crawling across me, and didn't bother me at all. And again, a few weeks ago, she told me that she killed a spider in her house. These are things she could never have done before. Now, the weird thing was, she didn't have to desensitize herself, get close to spiders, watch TV programs about them, or anything like that. All we did was we symbolized, we talked about a dream, spiders. We don't even know, I can't even remember what insight we had, but the very talking about the dream dissolved the symptom. And that's a similar thing. Like if you go to analysis, if you have, say, a sexual inhibition, and you just, the sexual inhibition, you can't say have sexual intercourse, you can't sexualize sex. And then you go to an analyst to kind of dissolve that symptom. You go like, this is a problem in my relationships. And then the analyst is talking about your dreams and your fantasies and your relationship with your parents. And you might initially go, I'm here because I have a problem with a sexual inhibition. But then weirdly, if the analysis works, through doing all of this other stuff, without even realizing it, the inhibition begins to dissolve away, or it becomes less of a suffering to you. You begin to enjoy it. So, it can happen in a number of ways, but it's again this weird thing of it's not directly going do or don't or directly addressing the symptom. Again, weirdly, as you said, it's about becoming aware of yourself, becoming aware of your unconscious, symbolizing something, and kind of putting more and more of yourself into the symbolic. This is in and of itself transformative.
Very nice. You should have told her to burn her house down. I don't know how anybody. If I wake up and a spider is crawling on me and I don't react in some way, I think I will have gone too far in my analysis or in my mental health journey. I think
Yeah.
that'll be my tell of like, okay, I'm gonna pump the brakes here because I want to not. I will take that personally when a
Here
spider
we're letting guys
approaches.
down here. You're scared of spiders and I take baths. This is embarrassing to both of us.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you why I'm scared of spiders. They're scary looking. And they gave me the heebie-jeebies. James Hillman has a really nice talk called "On Bugs" or "Going Bugs," and it's all about this bug symbolism and the spider being he kind of makes fun of like the Jungian thing of like the spider is the devouring mother and it's shaped like a mandala and all this stuff, and then at some point he's just like, no, we're disgusted by bugs, where it's like a universal thing. Not universal, but in our culture. Um,
Yeah, because some
anyway,
people eat bugs. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. People are different. Now, here's the last one, Pete, and we'll wrap it up after this. Be skeptical, but learn to listen. Now, this is one he felt necessary to add. He felt that the top four, there's one still wasn't done. Now, I think four is a rounder number, but five is fine. What do you think about that? Be skeptical, but learn to listen.
I mean, it's a nice kind of, I guess, right? It's a nice piece of general advice. I don't want to sound like an asshole and be attacking everything, but I do,
I won't
and I'm
take it personally.
sure, yes, and I'm sure he will expand on this. But of course, there's certain things to be skeptical of and certain things not to be. When you fall in love, skepticism is not probably appropriate. It's not even appropriate. Is not even the right word. It doesn't. And it's the heart has reason
Yeah.
that reason does not know, as Pascal says. We believe that when we close our eyes, the world doesn't disappear. Now, that sounds silly to say, but actually, again, some people struggle with these ideas. They struggle and they think that reality is a fiction, or they,
Well,
which is an interesting philosophical point. Yeah. So, but there's certain things that there's a thing called reformed epistemology calls properly basic beliefs. But are there beliefs that it's proper not to be skeptical about? Now, again, I don't want to pick holes because I think in general it's
sure.
great, it's a question, but that's the problem with these phrases is actually I could probably think of half a dozen things that skepticism is potentially not the most appropriate response to. If a friend makes a promise to you, um, there's times where you have to take the risk of being credulous and of believing
Yeah.
and having belief. So, but as a general rule of thumb, yeah.
Why not?
What do
Would
you
you
think of it?
say? Well, I'm curious if you feel like when it comes to, I don't know, ufology, do you
Hmm.
feel that you are both skeptical and you have learned to listen to the undeniable evidence in favor of non-human intelligence? Do you believe that you are still leading with the skepticism and perhaps too much?
It's a good question. In terms of
It's
the
really not.
UFO
It's really
stuff,
not a good
yes.
question.
Well,
It's
it
not.
is because you're definitely poking and saying like, well, Pete, we all know that you are pretty skeptical about the UFO thing,
So,
but you know, but
checkmate.
am I? Yes, checkmate. But am I? Is there? The question is there have I got an evidentialist approach, i.e., is there evidence that would convince me? And I think yes, yes. If there's definitely, I would say, evidence that would convince me, because I do believe that it is likely that there is, well, I do believe that life is almost definitely all through the universe. In fact, I believe the best theory for life is that, and this sounds strange at first, but that life began relatively early in the universe, about 17, I think maybe million years after the Big Bang. There was these perfect conditions where water could exist, where it was the
Mhm.
perfect temperature for life. And potentially at that time, let's say 17 million years, I'm probably wrong in that, but whatever, very, very early on in the birth of the universe, the conditions for life were existed everywhere in the universe. And then probably
Mhm.
the genome was probably formed then, and then went into hibernation for billions of years. And when it found planets that were habitable, that evolution could continue. And the reason why I think that is because I don't think the genome could have evolved as quickly as it did on planet Earth. Like, I think there are problems with how quickly life developed on planet Earth that can only really be solved if you go, life actually started way, way before that. So I am more skeptical of intelligent life, actually. I think intelligent life might be quite rare in the universe. In life that has got to the point where it can have self-consciousness and develop highly advanced technologies. And then the one that I'm most skeptical of is the idea that that life that does exist might be so far away that we will just never encounter it. But still, I'm open to, if you can give me the evidence,
Yeah,
I will look at it.
that's fair. That's a fair. All those claims are fair. I think the word is panspermia. I think is what that's called when the life form
Oh,
originates elsewhere. And then
very good.
there's directed panspermia, which was an idea that I believe Francis Crick came up with, of Watson and Crick, the one of the two discoverers of the double helix. And yeah, he postulated that we could figure out uh, the origins of the universe if we put a bunch of pallets of like embryos on a spaceship and just sent them into orbit for hundreds of years until they landed on a planet and were able to grow organically. So that would be like us sort of showing that it's possible. He was a weird guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason why I think they're on something there is because I think mathematically, and this is where creationists, have an interesting point, is there's a guy, Lennox, actually from Northern Ireland, but he kind of shows that mathematically it seems literally, basically almost impossible that life would have evolved as quickly as it did on the planet. But that
Yeah.
does get answered if you go about 17 million years after the Big Bang, life actually
Yeah.
could have evolved at any point in the universe. Then I think the mathematics works. But anyway, but
Interesting.
yeah, it's very interesting. Oh yeah,
Well, I
but
mean,
you showed
we'll
me
be
evidence, which is those little mummies, those little mummy babies.
exactly. Yeah. What more do
Yeah.
you need?
Well, I keep looking that up every now and again to see what people are saying. Has that been,
Yeah,
you
he's
know,
still he's still doubling down on it. He's
yeah.
invited people from NASA and I think from like Harvard or something to come to go check out the bodies,
And
the
are they
alien
doing it?
bodies.
Are NASA going to do it?
I can't imagine that anyone's going to take the bait just because I don't believe anybody would want to risk their careers, and also that's not how you do it. Like I don't think you're supposed to just be like, come look at this thing. Like there's like a process, right? With science, it's
Yeah.
not just like book a flight. But anyway,
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe we'll have egg on our face soon enough. The important thing is to be skeptical, but learn to listen. So in terms of this episode, Pete, I feel like we've really gone through a number of things and really helped people from not getting help, and I think that's what
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
best at.
That's what we're all
And so
about here. Yeah.
yeah, is there anything that you want to close out in terms of self help? Any self help tips for folks that maybe we've skipped over for some reason?
Yeah. Well, to sum up what I'm kind of saying in a nutshell, it's like I think that the best way of changing is ironically to not try to change, but to try to look at yourself, ask yourself, why your symptoms might be the solution to certain problems. Try to
Yeah.
see what they may be covering over. And as you're able to do that work, ideally with somebody else, like a therapist of some kind, I think then change can happen. And actually, then you can start to take the advice of self-help. So it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like AA. First, you have to be in a space where you're accepted, where you can be honest, where you can kind of confront that you're an alcoholic and confront why you're an alcoholic, what enjoyment you get out of it. And then once you've really experienced that grace and you've been able to symbolize it, then the 12 steps can be helpful. But the 12 steps won't be
Nice.
that helpful without step zero. What about yourself?
Our symptoms are angels with messages from the divine. Inside of them is the kernel of emancipation, but in order to reach it, one must dive fully into the symptom in order to, I believe Jung says, drink it down to the dregs, which I don't really know what that means, but I like saying it.
Wow, was that
I
all
don't know.
Jung? Because that was a very nice quote, or was there some of that you?
No, that was some of me. I like to add a little razzle dazzle myself
I
sometimes.
was, guys, that was very good, man. I really like that.
Thank
I
you.
really
Yeah,
like it.
no, I think it
Yeah.
is. Hillman talks about the. I like symptoms as angels. It's a nice way to think about it.
Mm.
Anyway, folks, if you want to leave us a review on iTunes, it would help us a lot. And you can also go to patreon.com/fundamentalist just because it helps support the podcast. And we appreciate you guys listening, sharing this, telling your friends about it, tweeting at us, and messaging us. If you have stuff you want us to cover, feel free to reach out in whatever way you fancy. Pete, anything you would like to mention? I wish you the best of luck on your retreat, and I hope
Thank
you
you.
do a wonderful. I hope you have a wonderful time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.